What's up? What's up? What's up? It's your boy, the network. And today's topic is 5.2a, AAA with TACACS Plus and RADIUS, and 5.2b, local privilege authorization fallback. That's right. We're going to cover two topics today because they kind of go hand in hand. And the second one is one really simple method. So this is a topic in the CCNP route exam. It will be known as the CCNP Enterprise exam come February 24th, 2020. Let's go ahead and take a look at the exam blueprint. See where we came from and where we're headed. Hashtag labeveryday. And most likely this topic will be in the new exam, CCNP Enterprise. All right, it's the exam blueprint for implementing Cisco IP routing, exam code 300-101. Again, it will be known as the CCNP Enterprise exam. We just wrapped up the section Describe iOS AAA using local database. Today we are going to move on to describing device security using iOS AAA with TACACS Plus and RADIUS. We're going to do both sections 5.2a and 5.2b, TACACS and RADIUS, and local privilege authorization fallback. After that, we're going to move on to configuring and verifying device access control. So what is AAA with TACACS and RADIUS? First of all, what's AAA? Well, if you remember in the last video, we said that AAA stands for authorization, accounting. I think I said this in this is not in the correct order. So authorization, accounting, and authentication. So the first one is really authentication, which basically is like your username and password. We need to verify who you are. We need to verify your identity. The second one is authorization, which basically says what you are allowed to do. And that's what authorization is. And the third A stands for accounting. It's basically a log of what you have done, an accounting, just like a security log that the security officers need to keep, right? Now, TACACS Plus and RADIUS, these are basically two security protocols that we use to keep usernames and passwords and authenticate users that will be on logging onto these networking devices. Now, let's head over to the slides for a little bit more information and some fun facts. So before we go further into TACACS Plus and RADIUS, remember in the last video we were talking about what local authentication is, right? We said that we create usernames and passwords on the router, right? And the user will establish a connection to the router, right, using SSH or Telnet or whatever, and then the router will prompt him for the username and password. That username and password is stored locally on this device. Now that's local-based authentication. For this video, we're going to be talking about server-based authentication, right? Where the username and basically the username and passwords are stored on the server. So if you look here, the user establishes a connection with the router, right? He gets prompted for username and password. The third step is the router passes the username and password to the server. It could be a Cisco Secure ACS for Windows Server. It could be RADIUS. It could be TACACS, and we're going to talk about what the difference is. But in this case, this is an ACS server or engine, and then he stores the username and password, and it will reject or accept it. He will pass that information on to the router, and then the router finally will be granted access to the networking devices. So that's the difference between local and server-based. So basically, local, the username and passwords are stored on here, and he does the authentication or authorization, or there's no accounting with local. And then server-based is where the username and passwords are stored on the server, and the authorization, accounting, and authentication, again, are done by the server. That's basically the difference. Now, what's the difference between TACACS and RADIUS? First, let's talk about RADIUS. The reason why we want to talk about that first is because right here, that's the most important thing. It only encrypts the password. That's the main difference between RADIUS and TACACS. Nowadays, you're not going to really see too much RADIUS. Even the job that I work at right now, we use TACACS accounts to access our networks. Basically, that's the main difference between RADIUS and TACACS. RADIUS only encrypts the password. TACACS encrypts both the password and the username. So other fun facts about RADIUS is that it stands for, no, it doesn't mean circle. It's an acronym. It's actually an acronym for Remote Authentication Dial-In User Service. It's a standards-based protocol, just like TACACS. It's also standards-based. It uses UDP ports 1812 and 1813, and we're going to talk about what each of those do. It combines authentication and authorization. So it combines, this is another important fact, it combines authorization and authentication, right? Remember that. And it offers robust accounting features, right? However, again, it only encrypts the password. We're going to talk about the procedure, so let's forget about this right here, the configuration. So when we discussed this part in the first video, or in the last video, AAA new model that enables AAA, right? Then you say who the server is. You're identifying the server where the username and passwords are going to be set or created on. Radius server, or radius hyphen server, and then you type in host, the IP address of the server. So like, for example, if this would be the IP address of the server, right? We're saying radius server host, the IP address, authentication port 1812, accounting port is 1813. So that's the two difference. That might be a question that might come up in the exam. So that's another fun fact that we need to try to memorize. Then we do a radius server key, which is kind of like a password. So radius server key, and in this case it's CCNP. And then we have to put in AAA authentication, login. It doesn't have to be in this specific order. In this case, this example is what they did. They're saying the login default group is radius. So for you to log into this network or this device, you need to authenticate to the radius server first. That's just for this example. It doesn't have to be in this specific order. You can do a fallback, which we'll discuss later in the next couple slides. So here's some fun facts about TACACS Plus. That's why I put this in the green. It encrypts the entire packet. So radius only encrypts the password. Not a good look. You ain't going to see this very, I ain't going to say it's outdated, but this is just not very secure as TACACS Plus, which encrypts the entire packet, as we see here. It stands for Terminal Access Controller Access Control System. See how it's easier to just say TACACS Plus. It's Cisco proprietary. Now, that's the other thing about it. You can only use this on Cisco devices, right? Well, it's Cisco proprietary. I'm not sure if it's open source, and I'll put that in the notes below. It uses TCP port 49, provides separate services for authentication, authorization, and accounting. So that I'm pretty sure I've seen that before while studying for the CCNA. This is separate services: authentication, authorization, and accounting, whereas Radius combines authentication and authorization. It does offer accounting, but it doesn't combine those two services. And it only offers basic accounting features. So I haven't really seen what the difference between the two is. If you know the answer to that, please put it in the comments below, or I may just put it in the notes below once I figure that out. And here's a basic configuration for that. It's AAA new model to, basically turn on AAA, just like we did in the last video. And then you define the server, the TACACS server. So TACACS server host is pretty much the same thing, except the port number is going to be different, right? So TACACS server host, the IP address of the TACACS server, port 49, right? Because we said it runs on TCP port 49. You put in a key if you want to, but most likely it's best to do that. It makes it more secure. You want to harden your network, right? Key, and then CCNP, which is the password. So you can put whatever password here. That's not solid, it's not static. You can put whatever password here. And then this is not solid either. You can put however method you want. You can authenticate locally first and then the server, or vice versa, and then fallback to local. We'll talk about what fallback is. Basically, you put in AAA authentication, login. By default, we are going to you need to authenticate to the TACACS Plus server, and that's what that is. So let's go ahead and talk about, this is real quick, talk about what local privilege authorization fallback is. Basically, same topology we had in the first slide, right? Or second slide, right? Let's say the TACACS server fails, right? Or your ACS server fails, right? That's why we got this red X here. And you try to log into this device, but the username and passwords are stored on here. So this would be akin to and this is why, it's just like your email account, right? Let's say, this is why local passwords they don't scale well, right? Let's say every computer you jumped on to log onto your email account had a different username and password for every computer, right? You log into your email on your phone, it's a different username and password. You go to your desktop, it's a username and password, right? That's why it's so much easier to have a centralized database, right? But what if that database fails, right? This is where local privilege authorization fallback falls in, right? Or comes into play. We have a username and passwords stored on here just as a backup. So if this fails, or we just for some reason can't reach it, then we have a username and password that's stored on the router, so that way we can still log on to the network device, right? Again, you can use local database fallback if the TACACS Plus or Radius server becomes unavailable. Simply add a local keyword. Notice here in the red, we do it that way at the end of the method list, so users can use the local router database as last resort. So basically what I just said. Y'all know how I like to just break it down in simple layman's terms, or my southern drawl speak. I don't know, however you want to say it, before I start giving you these technical terms that I got from, like, you know, the Cisco's white papers and stuff. But anyways, you would type in AAA authentication, login. By default, we're going to log on to the Radius server, and in the case that fails, fall back to the local usernames and passwords. And that's what that is. So when plan A fails, let's go to plan B. That's basically what it is. We are going to go ahead and fire up Boston NetSim and finish the lab that we did from the last video, task 3, basically. Let's go ahead and do a little bit hands-on. I'm sorry I ain't got that little girl for y'all on here to let y'all know that we're going to do that. All right, in case you haven't seen the last video, this is the lab we're going to be working with, right? We got the workstation, the headquarters router. Don't worry about the regional router. And this is the ACS server that we're going to be authenticating against. So we're going to have, again, this is the workstation, headquarters, and the ACS server. Don't worry about regional. We're going to configure the router to authenticate to the ACS database, which is here. So the router, HQ router, basically. It says configure the router. In this task, you will configure HQ router to authenticate against the ACS database. ACS server has been pre-configured with the credentials listed below. So don't forget that. Here's the server address. Here's the key. Here's the username, the password, and here's the enable password. Remember, this is different from the username and password. So, okay, unless otherwise instructed, perform the following steps in HQ. Log into the HQ headquarters as user HQ admin with the password HQ pass. So we're going to go to HQ. Username was HQ admin. Password was HQ PASS. All right. On headquarters, configure the ACS's server's IP address so the router can communicate and authenticate with the server. TACACS Plus communication should be authenticated by using the key Boston and net and IP address 192.168.2.254. Okay, do you remember how to configure a TACACS server? Pause it and think about it. All right, we back. We say AAA new model, but that was already done in the last video. We're just continuing this video, right? We define a host with TACACS server, host, the IP address, port 49, the key, and then CCNP, or not CCNP, but whatever password, which in this case was Boston, right? I don't know if we got to do the port or not. So we go to global config mode, or user privilege exec mode, global config mode. We said TACACS server. The IP address was 192.168.2.254. Question mark. We said it was supposed to be a host, actually. TACACS server, host, and then the IP address 192.168.2.254. And then, so we did that. That's the host. And then we said the key was Boston, right? So TACACS server key Boston, all lowercase. And that's basically it. I don't think we got to do the port number. Let's see. In this case, we didn't got to do the port number for this version of iOS. So after the key, do we have to do anything? Nope. TACACS server, host, we can only do timeout. So on this version, we don't have to specify the port number, apparently. Create a login authentication method named AAA login and configure it to authenticate against the ACS server. You should configure the local user database to be the backup authentication method. All right, so we're going to create a login authentication method. So AAA authentication method named AAA login, right? So we're going to say it's a login method, right? The method is going to be AAA underscore login configured to authenticate against the ACS server. So we're going to say this is a server, right? So we say group. This is pretty misleading. You would think it should just say server group, right? But it says no, it's just group. And then TACACS, right? It's sometimes I think you'll see radius here. but this is only it only supports TACACS. And then you should configure the local user database to be the backup authentication method. And that's where 5.2b is. So this is where the local keyword is. Remember this? So we put in local there. Remember this keyword? This is basically our backup in case the server fails. Okay, step 4. Create an exec authentication method named AAA exec. So remember, authorization is different from authentication. We are creating authorization methods, what the person can do. So, and then configure it to authorize exec sessions against the server. You should configure the local user database to be the backup authorization method, right? This was backup authentication, what we just did. Now we're doing backup authorization in case it fails, right? So it says create an exec authorization method. So AAA authorization. I used to get these mixed up. Exec. Remember, these are not pretty straightforward. That's why I like to question mark through these. But it's always, you know, you're not going to be able to question mark through a multiple choice exam. If you get a sim like this, you might be able to. But I don't know if there's AAA sims on the CCNP exam. So exec, the name was AAA underscore exec. Configured to authorize exec sessions against the ACS server. So remember, we said server group is group. GROUP, and then if we said it's a TACACS plus server, and then after that we do local, and then we do local for the backup. So local, you should configure the local database, and that's what that is, local database, local user database to be the backup authorization method. That's what we're doing here. Same thing. Step 5, apply the AAA login and AAA exec methods to the VTY login of VTY lines. So we're going to go to the VTY lines, line VTY. There are only 5 on here, so 0 through 4. And then we are going to apply those methods to the VTY lines, right? So we're saying we're doing a login first. So let's do login. Actually, let's do the authorization method. Authorization exec. It is AAA underscore exec. That's our authorization. Now we're applying the list of our authorization methods. Now we need to do the AAA login methods. So notice there's no authentication here, right? That's the tricky part about this. We do have login, so that's what we're doing. We're enable password checking. So it says here enable password checking. That's what that is. So login, that's where the authentication is. You would think, you know, just by using logic, they would have just put authentication, but we do login checking for that. So login authentication, the name of it is AAA underscore login, and that's pretty much it. Configure the enable authentication, or step 6, configure enable authentication to use ACS server for primary authentication and to use a local enable password as backup. So now we're working with the enable password. Configure enable authentication. Enable, no, my bad. Let's question mark through this. So login again, no. Authentication, the default method. No, we need to work on the enable authentication. So how do we do that? Enable authentication. Now this is the tricky. This looks like a curveball right here. Configure enable authentication. Configure enable authentication to use ACS server for primary authentication. Enable authentication. All right, so I believe we just need to do, let's try this. Enable. No, that's not it. Get out of this. Enable AAA authentication. Enable, that's what we're trying to do here, not the lines. That's where I was getting confused. So AAA authentication, enable as the primary authentication. So once we see primary, we know that's default, and to use the local as the backup. So default is going to be enable, and enable default, and then to use the local enable password as backup. Group TACACS plus enable. I'm sorry, yeah, and to use the local enable password as a backup. So we don't do local here. We're using a local enable password as backup. The local enable password. So that's why we're putting enable here and not local. All right, so now from workstation, all right, we have 13 steps here. We're at step 7. From workstation, go to the workstation, telnet to headquarters 192.168.1.1. So telnet 192.168.1.1 by using, okay, so now we're telnetting. Oh, what am I doing? Let me get out of here. Telnet 192.168.1.1. Use the credentials listed in the table at the beginning of the task. What was that? The username was Cisco, password Cisco pass. And notice we're at user exec mode. That was step 7. Step 8. What credentials did you use to log into the headquarters and why? Well, we use Cisco and Cisco pass. Why? Because that's what they said to do.
Well, duh.
What credentials would you use if the ACF server failed? Well, we said that we were going to use the backup enable password. We're using backup enable password. Why? Because that's what we set it up as. So if this fails, we're going to use the enable password to log on. Step 10, from workstation, enter privileged exec mode. I'm going to go to privileged exec mode by enable. The enable password was Cisco enable, my bad. Cisco enable. Enter privileged exec. Which password did you use to enter privileged exec mode? Well, we use Cisco enable because we're already logged on to it. Step 11, disconnect the telnet session. Exit, we're disconnected. Step 12, can multiple enable passwords exist on a router? Yes, they can. You can have multiple enable passwords. Step 13, log back into the HQ headquarters router. So we're going to telnet back into it. Use the same username password we created. So now this is how we're going to log into the headquarters router. We're going to log in. He's going to prompt us for a username and password. And then once we provide it, he's going to check the ACS server. The ACS server is going to reject or accept and let headquarters know, and headquarters will grant us access. So we do Cisco, and I believe it's Cisco enable. My bad. Let's telnet back into it. We said it's Cisco pass. My bad. Cisco and then Cisco pass. And now we're in privileged exec mode. That is all I got for y'all today. That is my YouTube page. That is my Twitter handle. Go ahead and add me on Twitter. Go ahead and subscribe to this channel. Go ahead and hit the like button. Please put a comment below if you want to make any suggestions, or if I made any mistakes or anything like that, and or if you want a shout out. Anyways, please comment, like, subscribe to the network.